So our theme for this afternoon's session is marginalized and vulnerable kids. And I had several folks that I wanted all of you to get a chance to meet who I think are doing really important work with kids who maybe fall a little bit outside the margins of what we've traditionally defined as the disability ministry movement. So I'd like, Robert and Catherine and Rachel, just, if you want to take a moment and briefly introduce yourselves and, tell these guys about what you do.
Sure. I'm Dr. Robert Crosby. I am the Executive Director of Reach Hurting Kids Institute. Our mission is to empower the church to reach hurting kids. My background is in research psychology.
And I'm Catherine Boyle. Some of you may know me from being on the Key Ministry staff. I was just delighted to serve as Mental Health Ministry Director for 6 years. And now I'm on the board and just delighted to be here to help support the effort that is DATC.
And I'm Rachel Medefind, and I serve with an organization called the Christian Alliance for Orphans. I lead an initiative called the Institute for Family-Centered Healing and Health, and we focus on supporting organizations and church ministries that are walking alongside foster and adoptive families and want to really strengthen them for the longer journey of parenting and bring forward the best evidence and the best biblical pathways for being able to support growth, healing over time. And also, I attend church locally at the Falls Church Anglican, and I have a number of friends here who are representing our church. Woohoo! So glad to be here as a local church as well.
So I think we'll go ahead and I'll let Robert kind of kick us off. And what are some of the unique challenges involved in helping kids who've experienced significant trauma to have a positive experience at church?
Sure. So you had mentioned before that they kind of look at this outside the traditional realm of disability ministry because it's invisible disability. If some child come into the church, there's an obvious disability that we know needs accommodation. And when a child with trauma comes in, a lot of times you can't tell, or the differences that are apparent are misinterpreted. So when a child experiences trauma, they tend to struggle with fear, emotional fear, fear for their physical safety. They tend to struggle with difficulties just controlling themselves, whether it's controlling their emotions, they're more prone to outbursts, controlling their bodies, being able to sit still, controlling their minds, being able to concentrate on things and pay attention for lengths of time. They'll struggle with feelings of rejection. They may have learned over time from sometimes from birth that they are not worthy of love, that they are unlovable, and rejection is not just sort of this passing experience, but it's part of their core identity. It is who I am. I am a rejected person. And along with that, feelings of worthlessness. I'm out of control of my own life. I have no agency. I can't make decisions, and ultimately I just don't matter. And these feelings are manifest through behaviors in the church. So they may push people away. They maybe don't want to participate in things that they're invited into. When someone tries to befriend them, they might not just withdraw, but they may be openly hostile towards that person. When they're trying to maintain feelings of control, that may look like defiance, maybe saying cruel things to others, to their leaders. Emotional outbursts would be a common situation. So they might explode and scream and yell and throw something, behave violently. They may fall apart and cry. You have a Bible sword drill and they lose the Bible game because they can't find the verse quickly enough, and it triggers these feelings of worthlessness and rejection and failure, and they start to cry and fall apart. And so people will see these behaviors and they'll say, this is... They're choosing to misbehave. This is a bad kid. This is a sinful child. This is a child we can't handle. Let's get mom and dad or whoever brought them to church and let's send them home. The tap on the shoulder we just heard about, that's very, very common. And so this creates barriers that prevent hurting kids from coming to Jesus. And so it's so important that we can recognize this because we serve as, psychologically, right? We serve as proxies for Jesus. We're his hands and feet. And so the way that the children experience us in the church is the way they experience and understand God. And so if a child comes in who is in pain and they're communicating through their behavior that they are suffering, and we respond by asking them to, politely or impolitely, to leave, the communication is, you are not part of God's family, you are not welcome here, and you're rejected not just by me, but by the church and by God. You have no place. But when we understand where they're coming from and we recognize this is a sign that they're experiencing distress, that they're experiencing pain, that they're experiencing fear, let's figure out what we need to do to help them feel safe, to help them feel loved, even though they keep pushing me away. How can I continue to gently include them and invite them in so they know that they're loved? Then what they learn is, I am accepted and loved in this space by the Big C church, and most importantly, I'm accepted and loved by Christ. And that's why it's so important that we understand these things so that we can represent Christ appropriately and positively to children who are struggling.
Amen. Preach it. So Catherine, we were doing the mental health intensive together yesterday. And that one of the things we were talking about is that mental health ministry has been largely focused on care and support of individuals and families who are already part of the church. While when we look at the research, we know that families impacted by different mental health conditions represent the largest segment of the disability community that's currently excluded from the church. What do we need to do differently so that churches recognize the need to engage in intentional evangelism and outreach to the mental health community?
Well, as I was thinking about this, I started thinking about, actually thinking about some of the things that were being said yesterday about framing things in the language that pastors and ministry leaders understand. And I think that that's really what has to happen here as well. And a lot of times we talk about evangelism efforts in terms of unreached people groups, whether they're somewhere far across the globe or it's, typically a community that is not really local to wherever your church is, but they happen to be in the same geographic region. So people with mental health needs of every kind are currently unreached, typically in your local community. And so to whatever extent you need to communicate that to your pastor, in the language and the framing that they've been taught in seminary, or the language and framing that they use within ministry. It is helpful to use that as your starting point. And then, I would encourage, if you are that person who is trying to get your ministry team engaged in thinking about, how to reach out to people who have mental health needs in your community, to also think about every single ministry event that you're doing, whether it is specifically targeted to one group or another, but to think about every one of those ministry opportunities as an outreach to individuals that have mental health needs in your community. I mean, most of us probably just had some sort of Easter celebration in your church and may have had like some kids event associated with that. Well, every child that comes to an event like that has somebody who brings them. And, for many people in the community, that represents an adult or a child who is struggling with a mental health issue. We talk about a lot of ministry efforts that in the church, we talk about them broadly as, things that are going to be basically a one-size-fits-all approach for anybody who is either in the church or is coming to the church. But mental health and disability ministry is typically not like that. And in this regard, mental health ministry is no different than what we think of as traditional disability ministry. So if your pastor gives a little pushback because, okay, this is not in our big box, well, think about how many times in Scripture Jesus had a ministry conversation or an encounter that led to a transformation in a person's life when it was focused on just that one person, and then the ripple effects went from there. So, I mean, we just had a sermon about Zacchaeus, or a Sunday school lesson about Zacchaeus at my home church. And that one person's life radically changed, and the people's perceptions of that person radically changed because of Jesus' interaction with him. So that pattern is something that we can take and apply to whatever mental health ministry initiative it is that we have. And the pattern will repeat because it is a tried and true pattern that we see over and over and over again, that when you bless the one, it blesses the many. And then not only do these ministry events or the ministry to the one have that ripple effect in the community, but they have a multi-generational impact in that family too. So in this regard, mental health ministry is often no different than disability ministry, because when you reach the one person and let them know that they are valued and missed in God's kingdom, if they're not part of a church community, then everybody in that family unit probably knows there's a mental health issue, even if it's undiagnosed, but that has a tremendous impact on that entire family unit that can transmit to generations to come.
Well, Rachel, first off, I'm delighted that you're here, because I can tell you that from my firsthand experience when I was in church leadership, the church that I went to got involved in disability ministry specifically as a result of its engagement in orphan ministry, and found that we needed to take some steps to support the families, who, where that was their passion, where they committed that ministry. And CAFO, has been an extraordinarily impactful organization in helping, churches to recognize society's most vulnerable kids. Now, you've been doing some interesting stuff, looking at how can churches, support and come alongside parents and families for raising healthy kids. As a doctor, I tend to focus on problems, but, given the societal crisis that we're having with mental health, it would help a whole lot if they didn't get sick in the first place. So, what are you learning, and, what kinds of ideas and advice and guidance are you imparting to churches on that front?
Yeah. Well, Steve, first of all, I've just so appreciated getting to know you, your attentiveness to individuals and families, and I feel like that's been the means by which all of this has come about, because you have noticed, for instance, those adopted families in churches and cared for them and recognized the specific needs that they had, and that's a wonderful thing. The big picture thing that I want to start with is just the fact that the family wrapped around by a church is the fundamental good that is needed for every child, and definitely for children who have particular vulnerabilities. And it can be easy to move beyond that into immediate complexities, into programmatic solutions, but just that vision itself. And we know this through a lot of research that testifies to the fact that when that's not around, a lot of not good things happen. And then in turn, when a child who otherwise would not have a family is brought into a decent, loving family, say through adoption or foster care, so much good is imparted to them that you see growth across domains of their development in very measurable ways. And then a whole nother body of research that communicates that when a family participates in the life of the local church on a regular basis, a profound amount of good, mentally, emotionally, relationally, spiritually, in every way, physically, they receive profound benefits. So in my mind, that provides us with a recipe. A decent, loving family wrapped around and regularly participating in the life of the church. With that, just personally, I would testify to the fact that my husband and I have worked in this field now for nearly 2 decades. And what used to be challenges that families, adoptive families, would uniquely face, mental health challenges, behavioral challenges, now we are seeing at a rate, at a level that is across the population. Young people, the mental health crisis, and the behaviors and emotions associated with that are in many ways parallel to what we used to see a couple decades ago, primarily amongst those who'd experienced unique harm. So we're facing a real trying time. And yet the good news is that so many of the goods that bring healing and health, that you could say bring human flourishing, are very basic, ordinary goods that can be brought into a life and built into a life over time through small daily habits. You could call them practices, things that you do over and over again in the context of the home, in the context of the church, that support positive growth over time. And that's, I think, the positive vision, Steve, that you're talking about. This idea that what Robert is bringing forward is often the beginning point, right? It's where a young person comes into a church or a home or a new environment, and they're really struggling. And that's very important to learn about, to provide pathways of access, right, for people to then enter into the life of the church. And so that's one component of it. We welcome people as they are, where they are. But then there's more that's needed. There's more that's needed. And that is a positive pathway of growth forward. And that's the sort of thing that we want to anticipate for every young person. We want to anticipate that they can grow. We want to anticipate that we can support a family in such a way that they can enter into the life of the people of God and become contributors in that space, that they can become among those who are serving and bringing good. And in fact, this would be a whole nother conversation, but there's a whole body of human flourishing research that very definitively communicates that the things that ultimately promote health and healing over time are the sorts of things that are uniquely the gifts of God to the people of God that we practice together in life: worship, prayer, serving others, giving generously of ourselves, forgiving, and that within each of these practices, we see unique human benefits that as we gather together and as we faithfully practice these things, produce change. So I guess I just want to really encourage us that the ways of the people of God are profoundly good for us. We bear unique and wonderful gifts that we can offer to foster and adoptive families, to vulnerable children, and to vulnerable families simply by being ourselves.
So we only have a very brief time, and there are a couple of sort of short answer, quick questions that I have for each of you, and maybe we can go through. And I'll have you start, Rachel, I'll have you start. What would be we've been talking a lot the last 2 days about like next steps, that this can all seem overwhelming, but what's your next step? And so like, what would you see as a next step for the folks here in attendance in making their churches more accessible to vulnerable kids and their families? And is there a specific resource or resources you could recommend to our attendees who'd like to learn more about the needs of vulnerable kids?
Yeah, I'll be really quick. There's a great book called Everyone Can Do Something. Jason Johnson. He works with us at CAFO, and it's a great way to begin to think about different roles that people can play, and it presents a vision for the body of Christ that does indeed come at the work of serving vulnerable people, vulnerable families with unique gifts and contributions. And so I would highly recommend that. And then I would definitely just say, don't let the position that you're in be a barrier to doing something. If I could highlight something that we've done in our church at the Falls Church Anglican, when we were beginning a foster and adoption ministry, we started a gathering called Pizza and Prayer, and it'd just be like this quarterly gathering, so only 4 times a year, where we got together, and it was for anyone who wanted to come and pray together and have some pizza together. It provided an opportunity for fellowship and also for prayer, and to just say, we care about these things together. And that provides a generative environment where ideas and shared passions and then planning can come from. So something really simple. Don't let bigger things get in the way from taking some kind of action.
So Catherine, next step and a resource.
So I think that it is really helpful if you want to do something very simple with your volunteers to help them understand maybe children or youth that are viewed as maybe problems, is just teach them that behavior is communication, and that behavior is always communicating something. So you don't have to go through a bunch of training for that, but that's something that's really helpful. And then when you're seeing behavior, there is a difference between can't and won't. And it can be very difficult to discern that, but just helping people kind of look for, what is that behavior communicating? And that carries on into adults too. So, those two things are very helpful in just like kind of honing your discernment for evaluating a particular situation or challenge within your ministry. So a couple of resources that I think are super helpful, and I used to share these a lot with key ministry contacts with questions about, how do I, be helpful in this situation. The Karen Purvis Institute at Texas Christian University has trust-based relational intervention strategies. They have a lot of videos and other resources that are free online. They're excellent. TBRI, trust-based relational intervention. We had a presentation, a quick take on that just today. They're excellent materials, and I would encourage any church to look into that. And then the Crosby's materials are great at the Reach Hurting Kids Institute. And also Dr. Mark Mayfield. He was going to be here but had a family crisis. He's got a couple programs, No Student Unseen, and a stoplight alert method for mental and emotional wellness. These are designed for schools, but there's so much application for churches as well, and I would just really encourage you, to reach out to him if you are interested in using his resources in your church.
I think I agree with all of that immensely. In addition to a knowledge shift is a paradigm shift in how we see things. We talk about discipline, of these behavior issues that create this barrier, as being not an obstacle to ministry, but an opportunity for one. And so when you see a child who's acting out, instead of saying, oh my goodness, how can I get them to stop this so I can get back to God's work, seeing this as like a giant beacon shining down, and the Lord saying, this is the child who needs a special touch from Jesus this morning. He's letting you know that this is the one I put in front of you because this is the child that needs your attention and your care right now. So I think when we have that shift and then have some knowledge of this behavior is communicating something that's communicated in need, how do I respond to that? That can make a huge difference. And the Purvis training is fantastic. We had grant funding to try to equip quickly volunteer teams that won't go through an extensive training, but we made the Reach Hurting Kids workshop, and so there's these self-guided curriculum that leaders use with their teams. So within in a quick afternoon, it can kind of get everyone up to a point where they have a common vision, a common vocabulary, and a common toolkit to start making that shift.
Well, Robert, Catherine, Rachel, thank you so much for all you're doing and for your willingness to take the time and share with our people today. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Rachel.